was that we as journalists must also prepare to gradually transit from the permanent employment model to producing competitive content for sale to media houses at competitive rates. The whole question of permanent employment, I think, in future may be unsustainable because some of the media houses that have been set up cannot sustain permanent employment. I mean, that is true. If the big ones are suffering, then what about the smaller ones? So journalists must also begin to re-engineer their thinking and say, look, I don't have to be permanent employed, but then I can produce quality content that I can sell to the media houses. And then as we talk about competitive, or competitive content or top-notch content, then we must also think about how the industry can set up a team or a task force or an advisory team to manage the graduated payment rates for the content that is produced by journalists, especially the freelancers, because there will be many of them in correspondence. Because previously, we have had a situation where media houses take one copy or content that is produced by a correspondent, sells it in multiple avenues and raises money, and then they don't even credit the journalists. Some of this must now stop so that we set up a team in the industry that is going to say how from the low, what is the bare minimum that can be paid for content? We have had content which is personally suffered where my content is produced. I mean, I produce content and then it is sold and I'm not paid anything. So this must begin to stop. So I think I'm suggesting that we need to put up a team. It can be a task force. It can be an advisory team that should look at the rate of payments for content produced by freelance journalists or correspondents and any other person who will be creating content to reduce exploitation so that we establish a basic minimum in terms of what is it that can be paid. So if we are going to sell content to media houses, then they must be ready to buy content at some competitive rates. And therefore, we should have no excuse about which story is accepted and then they are not paying for. I would also like to suggest that journalists must now leverage on technology to survive. We must change the mode and content of our stories and seek opportunities beyond national boundaries. Kenya alone will not make journalists in Kenya survive because we have far too many journalists in Kenya. And I want to suggest in terms of using technology, they should also, many of them have been setting up their own online content. I think we need to up the game in terms of online content and find a way of monetizing that online content, and that the online content or media that we set up must also be made as credible as possible. The other point, and I'm concluding, would be that the media industry must engage with the government and seek financial support for their operations. Across the globe now, I'm relating with the certain frameworks in Africa, and across Africa now, many media organizations and formations are engaging with the government because media is treated as an essential service, and the government must see media as an essential service. And therefore, the engagement with the government is to convince the government that they must be able to pay for this essential service. And the payment may not be necessarily direct payment. It should include tax reductions. It should include exemptions on newsprint, equipment, and other items that are core to media operations. Because some of these are extremely expensive and they make the cost of running media very, very expensive. So I want to suggest that as media stakeholders, we should not be shy to engage with the government and tell them that the monies they are receiving on our behalf, either from taxes or from donors, like right now we have the emergency fund, the emergency COVID fund that is being pilfered. How come that we are not looking at the media as an important component